There's enjoyment in my sense of being able to dive into a better understanding of who I am. I don't think one of those things that once you start to scratch the surface, you realize how deep it is. And you realize that it's probably a journey that I'm going to be able to take my entire life, which sounds like a lot of fun.
This is Intentionally Ever After. Join intentional lifestyle coach Joe Bukartek for a series of personal conversations and coaching sessions with various people about how living with intention shows up for them.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Intentionally Ever After. Today, I am thrilled to be chatting with my dear old friend, Mr. Joe Antony. Joe, welcome.
Hey, Joe. Good to talk to you again.
Yeah. Hey, would you kindly introduce yourself for folks?
Sure. I always have a little bit of a challenge introducing myself in a broad context. I don't know whether to say that I'm a yogi that also is a business person or a business person that's a yogi. I usually wake up in the morning and try to put one of those two hats on and see what comes out from the day. So yeah, my background is, Joe, as you know, we met back in university days. Since then, I've been living in different places around the US and then internationally, currently coming at you from Melbourne, Australia, where I've been living for over a decade now. I run a digital health startup called Collab Care. And as previously mentioned, I'm also a yoga instructor and practitioner. So that's probably me in a nutshell.
Yeah, it's a pretty full nutshell there. It's super interesting. So when you wake up in the morning, you try to put on one of those two hats at least. What's kind of your default?
Depends if I can stay away from my phone in the morning. But what I hope my default is, and what I think mostly achieve, is waking up and doing my meditations and getting into that zone first. Without fault, I find that when I get myself into that zone, the rest of the day just ends up being better for whatever reason, as opposed to the opposite of that, where I wake up with some dreaded email that I have to attend to, and then my day just takes a downslope from there.
Yeah. Do you feel like these two identities are in opposition with one another, or how do you kind of integrate them? How do they interact with one another?
That's a really good question. And I think they're fully integrated. The way that I manage, the way that I lead is very aligned to my yoga practice, into my identity, into my sense of self, my sense of awareness, my sense of decision making, and the way that I deal with people in a more, I guess, empathetic and judicious way, all comes, I think, from my yoga practice. So I actually do yoga teaching and training along with meditation and mindfulness for corporate executives as well. And so I try to bring them across that sense of the benefits of yoga, of how it can actually make you a better business person, really at the surface level before anything else. Just pure stress management is a huge initial benefit. But then, like I said, to be able to have a greater awareness of your decisions, how they're impacting the people around you and the corporate environment and even the external community that you're working in, I think just makes for better leaders, better decisions, and better business people.
Do you find these execs are pretty receptive to your messaging?
Surprisingly so. I think the tide has turned in terms of an acceptance for mindfulness and yoga as a bit of a practice. Most are willing to give it a go, a lot with initial hesitation. But, you start them off slow, just like anything else. You get them incorporated, they start to understand and see the value, and it has to be applied for their life, not with necessarily the initial goal of packing up your bags and living in an ashram for the rest of your life. But, if you're in the boardroom and you have a tough meeting happening, just take a second, breathe, calm your nerves, and try to get beyond that and move ahead with your day. And once they see that value at the initial stages, then I think it just builds from there.
That's great. So you do this also in addition to running your company, correct?
I do, yeah. So I teach yoga for underprivileged community groups. I teach meditation and mindfulness for corporate execs. And I also sit on the board of an organization called Yogahood, which essentially is providing free yoga services and the benefits of yoga, meditation, mindfulness, and extracurricular activity to underserved populations.
No big deal. Just a little of this, a little of that.
No,
Sounds pretty awesome.
Actually turned out to be a little bit. I went into the organization just trying to do something different from my corporate life and, just get more into the yoga community and really get into the teaching and giving back. I unfortunately sometimes I feel got tapped on the shoulder to say, you know what, with your background, you'd actually be able to help us on the board. And I ended up joining that. And now I do more of that than the actual teaching, which is a blessing and a curse.
Okay. Any adjustments for the new year as it relates to that, or all good at this point?
I'll probably keep it for right now, but we'll see what happens around the corner.
All right. I won't hold you to anything or challenge you in this moment. Joe, what does it mean to live intentionally?
It's a really good question. And I did give a little bit of thought. I think in my mind, I'd break it into two categories. I think one is the actual execution of it, to be able to have the discipline, to be able to build habits, to be able to, formulate the life that you feel you should be living. And there's tons of material, there's tons of advice that I'm sure is abound around that. I'm sure you read your bit and I've read my bit, and we can have a whole discussion about that. What I actually find more interesting, though, is kind of going back to my mindfulness training. And I think people get this sometimes backwards, where they get into the execution phase of let me set up these proper habits and these things without actually delving into who they are themselves. Your classic phrase of know thyself. So I think what I end up doing, unfortunately, and try to catch myself with, is setting myself for really good habits, but I haven't really thought about whether that's intentionally the habits that I want for myself. They just sound like good ideas at the time. I think what I'm aiming to do a better job of is to really understand myself, understand why I'm heading in a particular direction, what that direction is, what the bigger story is, and then figure out how do I do that. So the practice of, I think, meditation and mindfulness is really geared towards that. It really allows you to delve into a deeper understanding of who you are, as it were, kind of peel back the onion to really get to the core of who you are as a person, and then start to kind of build yourself up from there. A lot of, one of the classic yoga statements is that you have to do a lot of unlearning to be able to get to who you are. As we grow up and as we end up living our lives, we get a lot of inputs, we learn a lot, but we just kind of take those inputs and learnings for granted and assume that's now our personality or that's who I am as a person. Whereas the yogic philosophy, that those learnings and that personality that you built, and let's try to get down to that core.
Ooh, I like this. So my next question is about habits, but what I want to ask is not the habit that is currently giving you an exponential payoff, but what habits do you find that you sometimes get caught up in before you do the exploration of who you truly are? What are some tempting habits that are maybe more surface level and less connected with who you are?
That's a good question. Let's take diet, for example. Every couple of years, there's a new fad diet to get into, right? And you read up about it, it all sounds great. And you say, you know what, I'm going to do this. I'm going to follow an intermittent diet fasting approach because it's the thing to do and people are talking about it, and let's do it. Before that, I guess it was paleo, and before that it was Atkins, whatever the flavor of the month is. And I'm not saying those are incorrect, but you're just kind of following a habit and you're going through the process of that because it sounds like a good idea. Where I found my own diet and fitness approach is to really find out, what's actually good for my body. Let me not just take the inputs from the external learnings that are there, but try to understand where my own body feels healthy, feels nurtured, feels like it's in its best state, and follow that as a paradigm that's for me. Now, that again requires you to really dive into an understanding of who yourself is as an individual, what makes you feel good, what doesn't make you feel good, and start to almost experiment and explore that from scratch. So I guess that's one example. And you could probably give a bunch of other ones, but maybe that gives you an idea of what I'm talking about.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks. Well, it also sounds like it's a lot easier to just go with intermittent fasting, right? Than to spend the time exploring and experimenting on your own, right?
That's true, but is that fully intentional?
Right. No, obviously not, right? And that's kind of been part of my philosophy as well around living with intention is it takes time. You have to do the additional step of thinking about what that is, be it mindfulness or searching within. There's plenty of ways to live your life. People are on a track already. They have the blueprint from elsewhere, from their childhood, from whomever, and they could just keep doing it, right? But if you really want to live with intention, then it does require that deeper work, that additional deeper work.
Yeah, and I think a lot of us, myself included, start to build these concepts of who we think we want to be without going through that initial step. And then you find out at the end of it, hey, I worked really hard to turn myself into this person and fundamentally still not happy. Like that was a lot of work for what ends up being an unhappy situation at the end anyway. That's even more frustrating than I think not giving it a go at all. You may as well just have failed and not tried than have tried and aimed for the wrong goal. I think additionally to that as well, you mentioned that you're right. Parents are a big influence. Your friends are a big influence. You know, maybe even characters that you read about or, you know, you look up to are all big influences. But I think to be able to create your own sense not only gives you a blueprint that's going to be best for you, but you're also backing yourself. You can have a lot more confidence in whatever approach that you determine to be correct for you, as opposed to following somebody else's blueprint. And at the end of the day, we're all individuals. There's no right and wrong, I think, for somebody's intention. And somebody else might find an intention to be, you know, a real go-getter and say, you know, I want to try to dominate the world and that's what's going to make them happy. If that's what makes them happy, you know, go for it. Other people would think the exact opposite and say, you know what, I just want to sit on a beach and relax. And, you know, that's kind of my intention. That's what I'm aiming for. Then go for that too. I think having a non-judgmental aspect to not only other people's intentions, but more importantly for your own intentions, I think is really important.
Connect these ideas for me, if you would. The idea that if you find fulfillment in what you're doing, then it makes it easier to have less judgment about it.
Yes, I think so. If, caveat, you're finding fulfillment for yourself and not for what is an external view of yourself or somebody else's view of yourself. A lot of people, again, myself included, I'm guilty of all this stuff. You know, I sometimes look at myself and say, what part of my achievement at work is to, in some way, make my parents happy or to, you know, feel as though I'm setting up life for my family, or how much of it is just genuinely what I want to do for myself. If you were to take away those external influences, heaven forbid if my parents weren't around, or, you know, if I won the lottery and didn't have to worry about money, would I be doing the same thing? Pretty happy to say that I would. I enjoy my work. I feel as though it gives me a lot of joy. It gives me a lot of practice for my own sense of understanding myself. And I'm helping people along the way, I hope. So, you know, if you take away those externalities, I think I'd still be doing the same thing. And that gives me a lot of confidence that, yes, I'm on the kind of right path for fulfillment.
Yeah, that's great. It's a great way to kind of do a litmus test on yourself, right? To see, am I on the right track, on my right track? All right, I want to close the loop on the habit idea here and identify a habit that for you has had an exponential payoff, one that you've connected with, be it an all original one or one that might be similar to one off the shelf.
I mean, the obvious answer is kind of what we've covered before. Waking up in the morning and what kind of Joe am I this morning? And hopefully it's the meditative, calming Joe and, you know, being able to wake up and avoid the phone for the first hour, being able to have time for myself that allows me to do my meditations, to do my breathing, to do my yoga. I've tried to keep that as much of a habit forming practice as possible. Not easy, not perfect, but no habit is. Speaking of habits, I was recently reading about the different motivations that drive people's habits. And I think this has really kind of impacted my recent thinking about habit formation. That different people are, I guess, driven for habits for different reasons. So there are some people that are rebels that don't want to go with the rules. They want to wake up and just create their own rules for the day. There are other people that are, you may have known this philosophy from before. I can't quote it right now perfectly, but they're questioners, which I am, who are the ones that if I can convince myself that's a good idea, then I'll do it. If I can't convince myself or somebody else can't convince myself, then I'm pretty stubborn against it. The other one is obligers. And I think there's a fair number of obligers that are out there that will do something because they feel obligated by some external person or force to be able to do it. Those are people that would wake up and, for example, go to the gym because they know that their personal training session is there and that guy's going to be up there waiting for you. So I'll wake up and make sure that, I'll hit that session. Whereas I'll wake up and do exercise because I've convinced myself that is the right thing to do. And so I'll stick to it. So I think, again, without judgment, understanding what drives you allows you to be able to create and maintain habits a lot easier.
Yeah, it's like you just being aware of how your system operates. It sounds like you can really, really construct it.
Yeah, precisely. And again, that kind of comes back to awareness of yourself, right? Know thyself.
Yeah, I like when things have a simple theme and you can always come back to it. It makes it very easy to repeat it and replicate it, right? Especially if you get thrown off course, right?
Yes, exactly.
What have you said no to that has made a significant impact in your life?
That's a tricky one. It's interesting because most people ask the question in reverse, right? Most people say, say yes to the life, say yes to the world. But I like the question because I think, again, in terms of living intentionally, it's as much about cutting off stuff, cutting off stuff to be able to leave space for the things that you really do want to do. I always start with that, actually, to start being able to say, all right, if I want to do this, my pie is already pretty full as it is. It means that I have to give up something else.
For instance, in the life of Joe Antony, an example might be?
Well, when I started my business, I made a very conscious decision, for better or worse, that, I'm going to have to let go of some of my friendship relationships. And I enjoy my friendship relationships. I really, really, that really drives me. It's an important aspect of my life. But with all the other priorities in life, that was the one that was, that could be a little bit more flexible on. It wasn't going to be my family. It wasn't going to be my health and wellness. It wasn't going to be my yoga and spirituality. So it was a tough sacrifice. It was a tough sacrifice to be able to say, you know what, I'm going to have to let go of that for a little while I carve out more time for what I want to intentionally drive myself to, which is delivering this new business. But what's also, interesting about intentions is that they are fluid. They change as you go through different phases of life. And same with your, I think, limitations that you're putting on yourself. If you want to try to keep an intention in one direction, there's no reason why I can't at some point, and that point might be my 2022 resolution, to say, you know what, I need to rebalance this. I've been doing this for enough time. I need to get a little bit more joy from my friends and reconnect with that group of people. So, you know what, I'm going to have to etch out something from somewhere else and make time for that. So I think people get a little bit worried, or they maybe dramatize the view that if I'm saying no to something now, that it doesn't mean that I can't say yes to it later.
Love that idea. Absolutely. I think you're right. A lot of people do feel like this is a forever decision. This is fatalistic or eternalistic. No, you can choose differently.
And your priorities are allowed to change too. It also makes it extremely challenging, right? Unfortunately, you can't just sit out, say that, I know myself now, I know what my intention is, and I know what I'm driving to, and I never have to worry about that again. I think in a more realistic time frame, it's, take a little bit of a reevaluation of that on, I don't know, maybe a quarterly basis, maybe an annual basis, whatever it is. But give yourself some time to say, right, this is the Joe that I was previously. Is that the Joe that I'm kind of looking to be moving forward?
Yeah.
And is that the Joe that's going to be, there 10 years from now? I think it's rare and maybe a little bit disappointing if you say that, you know what, I'm going to be that same person from when I started building intentions. I don't know when that is, maybe in high school, to who I am as an old man.
Right. Well, maybe it shows a lack of creativity, right? That you refuse to change for the next 10 years.
Lack of creativity, maybe just laziness. But I think that also kind of lines up to fulfillment, because as you get older, as you go through the phases of life, you get fulfilled by different things. I'm less fulfilled. I wouldn't say fully not fulfilled, but less fulfilled by the big night drinking out as I used to be when we were college mates. But, that got filled by other points of fulfillment. I'd like to think grander, more most self-fulfilling, sustainable ways of fulfillment.
more elevated. Let me ask you, if I may, about the friendship no that you feel like the decision you made to say no to some certain relationships previously that you may or may not revisit. Is it a light switch that would be an on-off thing, or would it be more, I guess this is a leading question, would it be more of a discernment about the type of relationship you want? Obviously, you can tell what I wanted to say.
Certainly not a light switch. If anything, a dimmer. So what I did want to intentionally do with my friendship is, at least keep them in maintenance mode. So, catch up every now and again, go to birthday parties, send them messages, whatever it is. But I know those relationships are there for when I do want to turn that dial back up, that, I'd be able to do that to some degree. So that was part of the intention. In terms of I think you're kind of getting to the types of relationship and being more discerning with that. That actually wasn't the kind of biggest driver. For me, it was really just kind of allocation of time. But I think when I look at that retrospectively, thanks for the question, Joe, by default, you end up, I think, with less time for friendships, you end up just having to value the friendships that are going to give you, I guess, the most value back. So again, my drinking buddies, you learn that, those are maybe the relationships that I don't necessarily need to continue as heavily. But, friends that you can sit down and have a chat like how we're chatting and get some understanding of self or the world or whatever it is, or whatever it is that gives you fulfillment. I think part of saying no allows you to understand better what you can and can't do without.
So there's an element of experimentation then that is required so that you can truly know for yourself what works for you.
Yeah, I guess life is an experiment, isn't it? And as you kind of go through those different phases, you kind of start to see that, like, it comes back to our point that we were making earlier of being able to say no and then go back and say yes. Having let's call it a failed no, where you say, you know what, I'm going to cut this out from my life. And you find out, you know what, that was actually super important for my sense of self, my sense of happiness. I'm going to go back to it. And vice versa, being able to experiment and say, you know what, I'm going to say yes to this. And I think it's what maybe is going to be good for me, and find out, nope, that did not work out. I remember on a career path perspective, I had an opportunity and I was working in Switzerland, in Geneva for the WHO. And I thought that, working for a non-for-profit NGO would be a real career path option for me. Had a great time there, just personally, met some great people. But as a career path, realized not for me at all. That the corporate environment was much better suited for, I guess, my way of working. And, having that, I guess, failed yes was extremely important for my own decision making. And again, in terms of sense of fulfillment, I can then understand that that's not a path I want to do now or likely into the future either.
Well, also you've done it, not maybe to completion or to as long as others may have committed to it, but it's not for lack of trying. It's like the fine tuning that you're doing with your life.
The fine tune, the experimentation. Yes, exactly.
What area in your life feels just about perfect?
None. I don't know if I really think of my life in that way.
How do you feel about the term perfect? I guess we could start there.
That's really where it's at. Exactly. I don't think I'm really in an achievement of perfection, or even if I did achieve perfection, life is so variable as we move through it that if you hold on to that sense of perfection, then, you don't know what you're missing out on the other side. On my LinkedIn profile, it says that I'm constantly in beta. And, as being a CEO of a company, you kind of maybe think that, hey, this guy's got it figured out. He's sorted out his career part of his life at least. But I feel like not that at all. I feel as though this is just another step. It's another learning. And my next, whatever it ends up being, phase in work will be completely different. I'm not saying it's going to be better or worse, or that it's higher or lower or more perfect or more imperfect, but rather it's just a different experience. And so I guess I don't strive for perfection. I don't necessarily strive for that outcome. I think I try to focus more on, it sounds a bit cliche, but focus on the journey as opposed to, I guess, the perfection sounds like an outcome word.
Yeah, no, I accept that answer. It is a very good one. Now let's imagine that I put the word perfect in quotes. Would that change anything? If the idea of something in your life that was going exactly as you want it to be going?
I mean, in this particular phase of life, I think there are a lot of things that are going well. I'll answer maybe in a longer way, if you don't mind, because I think this is the purpose of these podcasts. So ever since I was actually quite young, I kept a mental scoreboard for certain aspects of my life. And I literally ranked them as like an A through F aspect of things. So I'll try to go through the list off of memory. But, for example, how are my friendships? How are my family? How is my spiritualism? How is my finances? How is my career? That might cover most of it. Relationship as well. I don't know if I mentioned that. And, I try to obviously keep as many of those as high as possible, but it allows me to kind of come back to that sense of intention, to be able to say, you know what, these aspects of my life are doing quite well. If I score myself an A or an A plus, would that be air quotes perfect? Maybe. But then there are aspects that are not doing so well. What ends up being confusing is a lot of the aspects that could be doing better are because I'm scoring really well in another one. So you have to sacrifice, I think, one aspect for another a lot of times. And that's where decisions get tricky. But to directly answer your question, I think on those aspects where I think I'm scoring quite well now would probably be actually on my spirituality and my practice on that space. I've been able to, really kind of allocate and find my space in that aspect of life. I'd also say career. Being in startup, unfortunately, I can't yet say that finances have followed that quite yet, but I'm having a lot of fun with my career and I really enjoy building this business. And I think it's extremely fulfilling and contributing to thousands and thousands of people's lives. So all of that is also really great.
Yeah, there's a huge sense of contribution there, it seems. What area in your life is just real shitty?
The reverse side of that question. I mean, I think I kind of answered it as I was going. Startup is tough. Startup is very tough. And we're bootstrapping this business, kind of looking for outside investment just now. But, it's been a big sacrifice financially, taken essentially very, very limited income compared to where I was at before to try to make this thing work. So, yeah, finances need to be kind of turned around, but I'm in control of it, I guess. I'm in control of my destiny there. It's not that I don't have options. I've made a conscious, intentional decision to kind of go down this path for all its challenges and benefits. But, on the balance of things, I knew that this was the time to make that sacrifice, to make that risk. I just, recently got married. I don't have a child yet. I don't have kids. We just bought a house, so I'm starting to stack on those responsibilities financially, but for the past number of years, this is actually a good phase in my life to give it a go.
It sounds, again, very intentional.
I try to be.
Who is someone you admire, and what do you admire about them?
I always admire my dad. He's been, very successful in his career, and he's been at the same time always takes his responsibilities very seriously, and responsibilities for the family and all of that. I wouldn't say he was, father of the year every year, but in spite of running a very large business, he always took the responsibility of doing what he needed to do for the family, importantly. And I think more than anything, he always lived his life with a lot of integrity. And so it's hard to do, I think, when he was in his position in his career, where there was a lot of opportunity for taking wrong decisions, for making shortcuts, for taking opportunities on the side and things like that were a little bit gray. But he never did any of that. He always lived very, very clearly within the bounds of his own moral code, and his moral code was very simple and straightforward. And I think, that I really respect, and it's something that I emulate as well. It gets tricky sometimes, especially these days where there's, I think, a lot of more gray rules that are potentially out there. But to stay far away from the line in the comfort zone of your own morals and your own rules of how to be in society, I think is something that I've picked up, and I'm really happy about that. I will make a note, though, Joe, that when we were in university, I picked up a really important lesson from yourself as well.
Whoa, hang on. I don't know that I'm prepared to have taught anyone anything at that time.
Well, there you go. See, now that's gone on the other side. Yeah, but I remember at that time, I was still trying to, I guess, especially understand my interaction with others. I was getting out of my shell, I think, in those university days. But you've always been so great at just communication and with connecting with people, and not at that surface level of connection, that actually getting deep into discussions with people in a real way. And, I looked up to that. And I remember you gave me some advice that actually really, really helped, which was whenever you're traveling or you're just in a place where you're not going to run into anybody again, I think you said the airport, or it's the best place, just strike up a conversation. Just, pretend that you're somebody else. Just dive into it and just be your most real, authentic self, because there is almost a 0% possibility that you're ever going to see that person again. And so you can really just give your whole heart to somebody. Maybe feel sad for that somebody, but that's their problem.
You won't see them again, right?
Yeah, exactly. You're not going to see them again, but you find out quite appropriately that you actually end up having real quick and meaningful interactions with people when you live that way. And I have to say that I've taken that lesson, put it into practice, and kind of lived by it till today. So hats off to you, mate.
Hey, thank you. Thanks for sharing that. I can't say I remember that specific conversation, but I know I believe that still to this day. So I love that. I love that you've taken that and kind of made it your own. That's cool. Thanks. What do you imagine some people admire about you?
I'd probably say resilience. I've gotten that a couple times, and I really like that sense of myself. So maybe I just remember when people say it. But I think resilience is underrated. Resilience, I think, gives you the confidence to go out and really strike out and, like we were saying before, experiment as widely as possible and put yourself in challenging positions. I know that my resilience was kind of at a peak, which I think I've maintained as well, where you can find yourself in a situation. I was in Chicago after living in a couple other cities in the US and then going back to my hometown, Chicago. Life was good. It was relaxed. It was chilled. I was back with my old high school buddies, had a cushy job, and there was nothing to really complain about. But I'm one that wants to challenge myself. And so I intentionally put myself in a challenging position. I moved to India, where my parents were living at the time. My background is from there, but I never really had a strong association with my culture. And I know it was going to be hard, but I think if you have confidence in your sense of resilience It means that you can put yourself out there, even in a proactively challenging situation, and know that you're going to be able to get through it. You might take some cuts and bruises along the way, but those cuts, those bruises, those challenges is how you, I think, most definitively build your own character and how you build your own sense of self. To be able to put yourself in challenging situations is character building. Now, it takes a lot for somebody to actively put themselves into a challenging situation. Most people would shy away from that for a very good reason. That, what if it fails? What if I can't take it? What if my life crumbles? I'm just kind of happy and comfortable here. Why should I take that next big step? But I think, at least for me, I get held up by the sense of regret. I'm driven by not having regrets about things, which has its pros and its cons. But, a part of the pro is that I want to go out. I want to try and experience as much as this life has to offer and hope that doesn't break me. The cons of that as well is that I'll probably stick to something as long as I possibly can until it's near breaking me. And then I'll, have to make a decision. Sometimes that long is too long. But yeah, I think having that sense of resilience, I think, gives me an understanding of myself of whatever situation that I get into. I'll be able to figure myself away from it. Might take some time, but it'll get there.
That's really interesting. Would you say that in the instance, maybe just the example of you moving to India or deciding to, was the incentive something other than, I think I can overcome this potential challenge, this is going to be tough?
Yeah, of course. There were multiple incentives for that. Getting close with my parents. I didn't have a great relationship with my parents growing up. So getting closer with them was important. Connecting up with an understanding of where my background and culture was, because I believe whatever your background and culture is, that's something that does kind of create a root structure to understanding who yourself is as an individual. You can take or leave different aspects of it, but I think it's good to explore. So there were, additional aspects to do it, but I think part of that sense of giving myself a challenge of doing something different was one of those, like you said before, an underlying theme in my life. And, same with taking the risk of leaving my well-paying, very corporate, cushy job and starting up a business and saying, what, I can go with no income for a period of time and minimal income for a period of time and just be okay with that. It's a risky move. It's not for everybody, and I wouldn't suggest it for everybody. So I think that sense of being aware of the challenging situation that you're getting into and having the resilience to know that you'll be able to kind of take as much of it as possible to give it a go and experiment is, again, that journey of self-growth and that kind of self-actualization of your own character.
That's good. I'm pausing for dramatic effect. Just soaking it all in. I love it. It's great. Joe, what other thoughts do you have that you would want to share with myself and anyone listening?
I think we covered off some pretty good ground there, Joe. I think we covered.
Oh, that's for sure. That's for sure. I'm being selfish here. It's yes and. I'm always yes and.
Yeah, there you go. As opposed to the no. Yeah, I think if I think about a theme for my life, it is around that growth through challenges. So I'm glad that was something we were able to dive into a little bit. And I guess that sense of understanding yourself and how challenging that really is. That it sounds like a pretty simple thing, but in the yogic philosophy of things, as you start to get deeper and deeper and deeper into that, it's a lifelong journey. And so there's enjoyment in that. There's enjoyment in my sense of being able to dive into a better understanding of who I am. I don't think one of those things that once you start to scratch the surface, you realize how deep it is. And you realize that it's probably a journey that I'm going to be able to take my entire life, which sounds like a lot of fun.
It does sound like fun. Hey, I want to thank you for letting us go along with you in your journey, at least for this portion, and letting us see a little bit into the mind of one Joe Antony. I really appreciate the time you've taken. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. It's been really fun.
This has been Intentionally Ever After, hosted by intentional lifestyle coach Joe Bukartek. If you would like to have your own intentional conversation with Joe on or off the air, visit intentionallyeverafter.com. Thanks for listening.